They called me Oscar. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wild.
St. Oscar by Terry Eagleton traces the downfall of another man caught between cultures.
The fact that he was Irish pretending to be English, that he was sexually ambiguous, that he was a socialist. He wrote The Soul of Man under socialism. That he lived in this kind of very luxurious context in London. His life was full of those kind of contradictions.
I never saw so clearly before how London has corrupted you. You'll never be a major writer if you don't come home. What have you ever done for your country?
I got out, didn't I? And if I did get out, it was because you forced me out. Who brought me up to imitate the English? Who was secretly overjoyed when I lost my Dublin accent? My dear mother, you hardly brought me up with the pigs. So I've been faithful to you. I've turned myself into what you wanted. I did what you urged, entered the belly of the beast and made my name there. Even the cabman can quote my lines.
Where did they bring this play to? They didn't bring it to the Opera House or the Arts Theatre. They brought it into the heart of West Belfast at a time of great demonisation of the West Belfast community, at a time when really it was a place where no one would go. It was St Agnes's Parish Hall, and it looked like a bingo hall. It was more suited for a primary 7 end of year show than for a top class piece of Irish theatre.
We played it here to a huge audience. There was an intense witness to this production, and more so maybe than anywhere else it ever appeared. I mean, you do it in London, everybody just laughs. It's funny, very funny play. Here, they watched it. They didn't want to laugh in case they missed some nuance of understanding.
Unlike William Joyce or Brendan Bracken, Wilde's demons aren't inside him. He is destroyed by the state.
My lord, there is a conspiracy against me. The young man with whom I'm accused of buggery will never be called to court because he is the son of an aristocrat. And one of the rent boys with whom I'm accused of consorting will not be called to bear witness in this trial because he is the nephew of the Solicitor General. Soliciting would seem to run in his family.
The judiciary is not independent of government, of society. You know, Oscar had to be punished. And in this context, in this hall, there, people here would have felt, you know, a kinship with the dissenting voice.
Whether it was his gayness, or whether it was the fact that he was different, or the fact that he was smarter than those who would oppress him, it was the difference which made a real emotional connection with the audience as well, because we were also beyond the pale.
In the production, there was a huge issue of St. Sebastian, the martyr, with arrows in him, and then at the end, I think all the clothes came off, and I hung there, and the cast came up and put arrows in me, and it was the final martyrdom of Oscar, a kind of exquisite torture.
But Field Day also cherished the possibility that, like the love scene in Translations, people can free themselves from the political turmoil that surrounds them. In Stuart Parker's Pentecost, the lives of 2 Catholic and 2 Protestant characters intersect in a run-down terraced house during the 1974 strike organised by the Ulster Workers' Council. Actor and writer Alan McKee saw Pentecost as a teenager in Coleraine.
Pentecost had a big effect on me when I was about 15, I suppose. I just remember hearing things expressed on a stage which I hadn't heard expressed in the form of drama before. One of the characters almost crystallises my opinion on religion and some of the things that I feel it's been responsible for in this country.
What would Jesus, holy Christ, do with us all here? Would you say?
I'd tell you exactly what he'd do. He'd expunge religion once and for all from off the face of this country until the people could discover no mercy except in each other, no belief except to believe in each other, no forgiveness but what the other would forgive.
Until they cried out in the dark for each other and embraced their own humanity. That's the only redemption he'd offer them. Never mind believing in Jesus Christ. That's the point at which Jesus Christ might just begin to believe in us. There's a grace, I think, about the end of that play, which is immediately uplifting, despite the fact that it's in what was one of our, possibly when we showed ourselves at our worst in the history of the 30-odd years of Troubles. But it was ordinary people being able to transcend that and being able to lift themselves above that on a personal and on a political and on a theological level, all that.
It's striving to fill a void. The void has been left, in my view, by the politicians and by the ministers of religion in this country. I think they've left us all in the lurch. I think they've left us in the dark. And I think we're going to have to find values and aspirations and beliefs in the future. In particular, we have to find a way of believing in a future on our own.
Well, it was the last play Stuart Parker wrote. He was a dear friend and wonderful writer, and actually his writing seems more and more vibrant the longer he's been dead.
Seamus Heaney wrote The Cure at Troy in 1990. Another adaptation from a Greek original, it showed just how difficult it is to achieve reconciliation. It can only come when victims of injustice put their grievances aside at huge personal cost.
The past is bearable. The past's only a scar. But the future? Never. Never again can I see myself eye to eye with the sons of Atreus.
Philoctetes himself, and an extension of our situation in the north, seemed to me to have the same kind of symptom or syndrome that both sides displayed in our situation. That is to say, refusing to give up their sense of entitlement to their resentment.
This is real turncoat talk. Have you no shame?
What's the shame in working for a good thing?
Good for who? Or my enemies?
Am I your friend or not?
I thought you were.
Stop licking your wounds. Start seeing things.
Heaney wrote a new speech, not in the Greek original, that explicitly ties it to Northern Ireland.
The innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. A police widow in veils faints at the funeral home.
I now think it was artistically a mistake. It mentions police widows in veils, it mentions hunger strikers, fathers, it mentions the current situation. And I think that the obliquity of the play was more important.
But then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme.
So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here.
1990 was just after the Berlin Wall came down. It was the year that Nelson Mandela came out of the island in South Africa. It was the year when velvet revolutions were occurring. I don't think I would have allowed myself the aspirational hope for change so rhetorically and so highly rhythmically in that chorus if it hadn't been for those surrounding conditions. Our conditions at home were quite grave at that time.
The only way in which Stuart Parker actually could proffer the possibility that there would be peace is to say, well, there's no reason to hope for it, but let's hope for it. In Heaney's case, there seemed to be more reason. So he didn't only hope for peace, he actually tried to envisage the conditions of peace, the healing process already active and already in train.
But 1990 was to be a year of crisis for Field Day.
I'm caught in a situation where I'm trying to protect myself and protect my on one level, and at the same time trying to keep this enterprise of Field Day vibrant. I don't know whether I'll be able to do these two things. Maybe one will have to go.
Brian Friel's new play Dancing at Lughnasa opened, but this time he'd given it to the Abbey Theatre in Dublin.
Did you feel, kind of hurt by his decision personally?
I just knew that it was the end of something, because the nature of the work would change. When translations came to Derry, it brought with it an enormous energy. When Lughnasa went back to Dublin, it was like the plug was pulled out and a lot of energy went out.
The unique partnership between Friel and Ray would never be the same. Dancing at Lughnasa went on to spectacular success, not just in Dublin, but in London, Broadway and in Hollywood.
I just felt that if Field Day had gone with it onto the international stage, that it would have done something for our company. We could have turned another corner and been energised in a new way.
But there was no lack of energy on the publishing side. The Field Day anthology of Irish writing was the culmination of years of work and brought together writers from all backgrounds and traditions.
Well, the importance of the anthology was to cover a vast space of time, to be there in different languages, obviously English and Irish and Latin. I'm just looking here for the section I edited on really Northern oratory, Protestant oratory, which I had a lot of fun doing. In a way, the one I'm fondest of is the speech by a man I greatly admired, Harold McCusker, when the Anglo-Irish Agreement was signed, and he talks about waiting like a dog at the gates of Hillsborough for the piece of paper, the Anglo-Irish Agreement that signed away his birthright. And interestingly, he quotes Pearse, he quotes the 1916 Declaration, all the children of the nation. It's a great anguished speech, I think a tragic speech.
But one part of society was almost absent from the anthology.
If you said to yourself, what is going on in Ireland, I know what I'll do. I'll read the anthology. You read the anthology, and feminism is not mentioned.
I cannot, over the 1,500 years of literary and non-literary texts that are in it, find myself in any position to make a judgment. Has there been a kind of proper balance? Have people been excluded or included?
For God's sake, Tom, we're not talking about balance. We are talking about the total exclusion of the lives of Irish women from this anthology. Total.
They keep coming up with odd phrases like unconscious prejudice, and I woke up one morning and I forgot, and, I'm sorry. But they are not engaging in the enormously serious debate, and that makes me think that, in fact, they have confused power and authority.
Field Day eventually issued another 2 volumes dedicated to Irish women's writing, an open admission from this revered group of men that they had been at fault.
For all of the hammering it took, for all the ideological and to some extent justifiable assault it received, it now, 20 years later, is a monument. And I'm convinced that many of the people who assailed it actually use it in their classes.
But for a long time there had been a war of words waged by critics who claimed that Field Day harboured a deep political bias. It was an attack on the ideas at the heart of Field Day.
Well, the criticism was huge, either both from Belfast, Dublin, and to a lesser extent, much lesser extent, in London.
I don't think there is enormous sympathy towards the history and culture of Irish Protestantism throughout the island.
We did play in Ballymena, and we played in Portadown. We did plays by people of both traditions. We did plays, versions of plays by Derek Mahan, Tom Paulin, and Stuart Parker.
In Field Day's own composition, the Protestant participants were, or what might be called, user-friendly prods. They weren't really going to question deep-laid nationalist assumptions.
The easiest thing in the world in the North is to use the sectarian thing. Say, oh, they're part of that side, we don't have to hear that.
The whole emotional contour translation in some way does yearn back, to some moment where all the places had their right names.
Brian Friel comes nationalist background. It's impossible for him not to be that.
Thomas Kilroy's play Double Cross, it's obsessively about Ireland and England and sort of mutual stereotypes.
What they wanted to say was, this is not a colonial situation, which is, in my view, an utterly absurd position to take. If Ireland isn't colonial, nowhere has been colonial.
Everybody's work in Northern Ireland was raked over by commentators, journalists, critics. There were seminars, there were conferences. Everything you wrote was inspected. I mean, it was microscopically inspected. You were actually either accused or praised. The thing was out of hand entirely.
By 1991, the close working relationship between Friel and Ray was over. Tom Kilroy's second play was their first critical failure.
That was the slippage in that production, was that Brian and I weren't there all the time. It's actually a great play. And one of my biggest regrets about Field Day is that we hurt that play.
Ironically, it was Field Day's political stance that led Tom Kilroy to resign from the board.
I felt that Field Day wasn't political enough. I would like to have seen very early on Field Day becoming, as it were, a kind of voice, a public voice, particularly on the subject of sectarianism. And it was when I realized that Field Day was not a movement with a specific goal, that it was some kind of process, I realized that it was never going to become a voice like that.
In 1994, Brian Friel resigned from the board of Field Day. Other directors followed, leaving only Stephen Ray and Seamus Dean. In 1995, there was a new production, but many people wondered if Field Day had lost its way.
The analogy really was with a literary magazine that has only got a certain term of life, really. That you're bound to sort of run out of energy.
Once the link between Brian and Stephen was damaged, there was no other linkage within the Field Day organisation that could heal or cure or supplant that one.
For 3 years, Field Day lay dormant. Then, in 1998, a new project was hatched by Stephen Ray. Co-production with Tinderbox Theatre Company, Field Day would produce another Stuart Parker play, Northern Star. It was an exploration of the aspirations of the United Irishmen 200 years before, to be staged in the very church where many of them had worshipped and discussed political ideas.
Oh, the French are on the say, they'll be here without delay, and the Orange shall decay.
Citizen Van Vogt!
No. It must be understood there is a vendetta against the Orange Society. It's true that many lodges have been formed into companies of yeomanry by the landlords. They will be sent against us, just as the Catholic militia are. But all these men are the gulls of history. Our quarrel is not with the puppet, our quarrel is with the puppet masters. They pull the strings. The English landed and mercantile interests. They are the power and the only power we unite to oppose.
The Presbyterian churches are centres of debate. They're not sacred places. They don't call themselves sacred, but they are places where ideas are supposed to be discussed. And this is a play of ideas. And the 98 movement was about ideas. It was about how ideas can transform our lives and our situations.
We never made a nation. Our brainchild, stillborn. Our own fault, we botched the birth. So what if the English do bequeath us to one another someday? What then? When there's nobody to blame but ourselves.
Our politics is so adversarial now. You never have the sense of great ideas being aired. But the theatre has a nobler approach. And it was a good few weeks to do that in this town.
February 2006, Brian Friel, a man rarely seen in public, is being honoured in Dublin.
Please welcome the President of Ireland, Mary McAleese.
And then his search through Field Day, through the theatre company, for a way out of entrenchment and a way through to fresh possibilities. And that helped open, in fact, to prise open, not to easily open, but to prise open a space through which a new future for this island is beginning manifestly to squeeze.
Today, Seamus Dean co-edits the Field Day Review and is still examining modern Ireland.
It needs revision, it needs change, it needs critique, it needs analysis, it needs commentary. So I think in that sense, Field Day continues.
I would say there'd be another Field Day production. There's things to be said, things to be investigated, things to be asked. But quite what form it would take, I don't know at this stage.